elderly waiter helped a sick millionaire and got fired. Next day, he got a call that changed his fate. Enjoy this amazing story, and comment down below from where you are watching. Cheers. The gentle clink of fine china echoed through the Grand Plaza Hotel's five-star restaurant, accompanied by murmurs of diners savoring their meals. For James Chen, the sound was a symphony he had orchestrated for nearly 3 decades. His every move was precise, his service impeccable, his demeanor unfailingly polite. Yet tonight, as he approached table 7 with a tray of steaming entrees, a clumsy brush of an arm set disaster in motion. The plate of Wagyu beef, exquisitely plated moments before, tumbled from the tray, shattering against the marble floor in a symphony of chaos. Gasps rippled through the restaurant. James's heart sank as he knelt to gather the pieces, his hands trembling slightly. His 68-year-old knees protested the movement, but he paid them no mind. Above him, the sharp click of heels signaled the arrival of Sarah Webb, the restaurant's young and ambitious manager. "Mr. Chen," she began, her voice sharp and clipped, "this is the second incident this week. We're running a modern establishment, not—" She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly as if considering her next words carefully, though the disdain in her tone was unmistakable. "Not a museum." James kept his gaze low, focusing on the shattered porcelain. He knew better than to argue, even if the incident hadn't been his fault. "I'm sorry, Miss Webb. It won't happen again." Her sigh was theatrical, loud enough for nearby diners to hear. "See that it doesn't. One more mistake and we'll have to reassess your position here." She turned sharply and walked away, leaving James to finish cleaning up. Around him, the restaurant returned to its usual hum of conversation and clinking silverware, but James felt the sting of her words lingering. He straightened slowly, the ache in his joints a constant reminder of his age. Through the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows, the city's skyline glittered in the evening light, its glow a stark contrast to the weight he carried. In his pocket, his phone vibrated, a reminder, no doubt, from the hospital about the overdue bills for his late wife Ming's treatments. He ignored it. There were guests to serve, and James Chen never let his personal problems interfere with his work. Later that evening, as the restaurant settled into its late-night lull, James retreated to the wine cellar. He found solace there, among the neatly arranged bottles that told stories of distant vineyards and meticulous craftsmanship. His fingers brushed over the labels until he found the perfect selection for table 12, a Bordeaux, aged to perfection. As he returned to the dining floor, he passed a cluster of younger staff members. Their laughter, hushed but unmistakable, prickled his ears. "Did you see how he still uses a notepad?" Tommy, the newest waiter, said with a chuckle. "It's like watching my grandfather try to use a smartphone." Jessica, one of the servers, giggled. "He probably doesn't even know what a tablet is." James pretended not to hear, his focus remaining on the task at hand. He poured the wine with steady hands, eliciting murmurs of approval from the guests. It was moments like these, fleeting though they were, that reminded him why he stayed. Service was his craft, and even as the industry shifted around him, he clung to the traditions that had defined his career. The night continued its predictable rhythm. Orders taken, dishes served, tables cleared. Each motion was a dance James had perfected over decades, but tonight, each step felt heavier than usual. The weight of Sarah's warning pressed against his shoulders, mixing with the constant worry about bills and the growing sense that perhaps the world was moving too fast for someone like him. As he served a young couple their dessert, a delicate chocolate soufflé that required precise timing, he noticed them taking photos with their phones, barely acknowledging his presence. Years ago, diners would have engaged in conversation, asked about the dish, shared their experiences. Now, the human connection seemed to be fading, replaced by screens and snapshots. He remembered his father's words from long ago, spoken in the kitchen of their family restaurant, the Golden Dragon. "Service isn't just about carrying plates, James. It's about carrying traditions, dignity, and the art of making people feel truly cared for." Those words had guided him through 3 decades at the Grand Plaza, but tonight they felt like relics from a distant past. The world wanted speed, efficiency, digital precision. There seemed to be no place for the careful attention to detail, the personal touch that James had spent his life perfecting. The night might have ended there, with James quietly completing his shift among the whispers and sidelong glances. But fate had other plans. Just before closing, a man in an expensive suit stumbled through the entrance, his tie loosened and face notably swollen. The host was preoccupied with another table, and Sarah Webb was nowhere in sight. The man made it 3 steps before his knees buckled. James moved without hesitation, his years of carrying heavy trays lending him strength as he caught the stranger before he hit the ground. "Sir, are you all right?" James asked, supporting the man's weight. The man's lips moved, but his words were barely audible. James leaned closer, catching fragments. Room 1542. EpiPen. The medical alert bracelet on the man's wrist confirmed James's suspicion. He was having a severe allergic reaction, and there was no time to waste. "Someone call 911!" James called out, his voice urgent but controlled. Around him, staff and diners froze, their eyes wide with alarm. "Step back, Mr. Chen." Sarah's voice cut through the commotion as she appeared from the kitchen, her heels clicking rapidly against the floor. "We have protocols for this. Security will handle it." James glanced at the man's face. His lips were turning blue, his breathing becoming shallow. Security would take minutes to arrive and assess the situation. The EpiPen was 30 seconds away. "I'm sorry, Miss Webb," James said firmly. "Fire me if you must." Without waiting for her response, he hoisted the man upright and made his way toward the service elevator, ignoring Sarah's protests. Behind him, he could hear her shouting about protocols and liability, but those words meant nothing compared to the labored breathing of the man in his arms. The service elevator seemed slower than ever. Each second felt like an eternity as the floor numbers ticked upward. James held the man upright, whispering reassurances, though his own heart pounded with urgency. By the time the elevator dinged on the 15th floor, the man's weight was sagging heavily against him, his breathing barely audible. James moved as quickly as his aging legs allowed, navigating the plush corridor with practiced efficiency. Room 1542 came into view, and he silently thanked his habit of memorizing the guest roster. Using his emergency staff key, another rule broken, he entered the room. The suite was immaculate, but James didn't pause to take it in. His eyes locked on the travel kit on the bathroom counter. The EpiPen was there, nestled among toiletries. With steady hands born from years of precise service, James administered the injection through the expensive suit pants, counting under his breath as he had been trained to do during the hotel's first aid courses. The response was almost immediate. The man's chest heaved as his breathing began to ease, the swelling in his face visibly subsiding. James helped him to the nearby armchair, relief washing over him as color returned to the man's face. But the moment of relief was short-lived. The suite door burst open, and Sarah Webb stormed in, flanked by 2 security guards. Her expression was a mask of fury. "Step away from the guest immediately," she barked. James turned to face her, his composure unshaken. "He needed immediate help. I administered his EpiPen." "Do you have any idea how many protocols you've just violated?" Sarah's voice rose with each word. "Unauthorized room entry. Unauthorized medical intervention. This is grounds for immediate termination." James opened his mouth to respond, but a weak voice cut through the tension. "No." All heads turned to the man in the chair. He straightened slightly, his face still pale but his gaze sharp. "No police, no termination. He saved my life." Sarah faltered, her tirade momentarily derailed. "Mr. Wellington, Enough," Marcus Wellington said, his voice gaining strength. "This man acted when no one else did. He deserves thanks, not punishment." Sarah's face flushed with embarrassment, but she pressed on. "Sir, while I understand your gratitude, our policies exist for a reason. Mr. Chen violated—" "Policies that would have let me die," Marcus interrupted, his tone cool but firm. "I'll address your policies later. For now, I'd like to speak with Mr. Chen privately." Sarah hesitated. her lips pressing into a thin line. She gestured for the security guards to leave, then exited the room without another word. When the door closed behind her, Marcus turned to James. "Sit, Mr. Chen. You've done enough running for one evening." James hesitated, then lowered himself into the chair opposite Marcus. The adrenaline crash hit him all at once, leaving him feeling heavier than ever. "I don't know how to thank you," Marcus began, his voice sincere. "You saved my life tonight. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be sitting here right now." James nodded, his mind racing. "I just did what anyone would have done, sir." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Not anyone. Certainly not your manager. Tell me, how long have you worked here?" 27 years, James replied, his voice tinged with a mixture of pride and weariness. "And in all that time, have you ever been treated with the respect you deserve?" James hesitated, unsure how to answer. Finally, he said, "It's a job, sir. It's not always fair, but it puts food on the table." Marcus studied him for a moment, then leaned forward. "I overheard you on the phone last week speaking with the hospital about payment plans. I remember thinking that someone with so much dignity shouldn't have to beg for basic care. Was it your wife you were speaking about?" James's throat tightened. "Yes, my late wife Ming. The bills from her treatments, they've been hard to manage." "Mr. Chen, I'm going to make you an offer. But first, I need to ask, have you ever considered leaving this job?" James let out a bitter laugh. "I've thought about it, but at my age, where would I go? Who would hire me?" Marcus smiled faintly. "I would." Before James could respond, there was a soft knock at the door. When it opened, James's heart stopped. Standing there was someone he hadn't seen in 3 years, his son, David. "Dad?" David's voice was uncertain, his expression a mixture of guilt and hope. "David," James managed, his voice cracking. The sight of his son standing there in his crisp business suit and designer glasses brought back a flood of memories, both sweet and painful. "I called him," Marcus explained, smiling warmly. "I thought this reunion was long overdue." David hesitated for only a moment before crossing the room and embracing his father. James held him tightly, the years of distance melting away. He didn't care about pride or past arguments. All that mattered was that his son was here. "I'm sorry, Dad," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been so stubborn. I should have been there for you and Mom, but when Mr. Wellington called me and told me everything, I knew I couldn't stay away any longer." James pulled back slightly to look at his son. The boy he'd raised had grown into a man, but there was still that familiar spark in his eyes, the same one he'd had as a child watching James cook in their family restaurant. "You don't need to apologize, David. You're here now. That's what matters." Marcus watched the exchange with a satisfied nod. "I'll leave you two to talk. James, take your time to consider my offer, but I hope you'll say yes. You're exactly what this industry needs." After Marcus left, father and son sat in silence for a moment, each wrestling with years of unspoken words. "Dad, I didn't know things had gotten so hard for you," David finally said. "When Mr. Wellington told me about Mom's treatments, the bills, I felt like such a failure as a son." "You're not a failure," James said firmly. "You've built a successful career, and I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you." David's eyes filled with tears. "I thought selling the restaurant was the right thing to do, but I've regretted it every day since. That place was our family's legacy. It was supposed to be my future, and I blamed you for taking it away. But now, I see how much you sacrificed for Mom, for all of us." James placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "The Golden Dragon wasn't just a restaurant to me, David. It was your grandfather's dream, my life's work, and what I hoped would be your inheritance. Selling it." He paused, struggling with the words. "It broke my heart, but your mother needed those treatments. I would have sold everything I owned to help her." "Then let's get it back," David said suddenly, his eyes lighting up with determination. "Mr. Wellington, He's not just any CEO. His company, Wellington Innovation Labs, they specialize in hospitality technology. But he told me they're missing something crucial, the human element. That's where you come in. James listened as his son explained Marcus's vision, a modern training center that would preserve the art of traditional hospitality while embracing technological innovation. The Golden Dragon wouldn't just be restored, it would be transformed into something even greater. "It's not just about serving food anymore, Dad," David continued excitedly. "It's about teaching a new generation what you've always known, that true hospitality comes from the heart. We could create a program that combines your expertise with modern efficiency, the best of both worlds." As David spoke, James felt something stirring in his chest. Hope, perhaps, or the rekindling of a dream he thought had died. His son wasn't just talking about rebuilding a restaurant. He was talking about preserving a legacy. "What about your career in Silicon Valley?" James asked carefully. "You've worked so hard to build that life." David smiled, a genuine smile that reminded James of happier times. "Maybe it's time to bring that experience home. Besides, I miss cooking. Really cooking, not just ordering takeout between coding sessions." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Marcus wasted no time putting their plan into action, acquiring the Golden Dragon's old building at a price that made James's head spin. But it wasn't just about real estate, it was about resurrection. David threw himself into the project with the same intensity he once reserved for coding. He spent countless hours in the kitchen experimenting with recipes that honored their family's traditions while incorporating modern techniques. His Silicon Valley experience proved invaluable as he designed systems that would streamline operations without sacrificing the personal touch that had made the Golden Dragon special. "Look at this, Dad," he said one evening, showing James a tablet with an elegant interface. "We can track inventory, reservations, and customer preferences, but the focus is still on human interaction. The technology supports the service, not replaces it." James watched as his son demonstrated the system, noting how it incorporated many of the old practices he'd always valued, like remembering regular customers' favorite dishes and special occasions, but made them more accessible to a new generation of staff. Meanwhile, James focused on developing the training program Marcus had envisioned. He drew from decades of experience, creating modules that taught not just the mechanics of service, but its heart and soul. Young trainees learned everything from the proper way to pour wine to the art of reading a guest's unspoken needs. The building itself underwent a transformation. The ground floor would house the restaurant, while the second floor became a state-of-the-art hospitality training center. The third floor was converted into a culinary school where both traditional techniques and modern innovations would be taught. Sarah Webb, to everyone's surprise, was among the first to enroll in the training program. "I want to learn," she told James, her former arrogance replaced with genuine humility. "I thought I knew everything about running a restaurant, but that night with Mr. Wellington showed me how much I still have to learn." As opening day approached, James found himself standing outside the building late one evening, staring up at the newly installed sign, "Golden Dragon Heritage Center." The characters glowed softly in both English and Chinese, a bridge between past and future. Ming joined him, her hand slipping into his. Her health had improved significantly since starting new treatments they could now afford thanks to Marcus's generosity. "Your father would be so proud," she said softly. "You've not only preserved his legacy, but made it stronger." The restaurant's interior blended traditional elements with contemporary design. Hand-painted murals depicting scenes from Chinese mythology shared space with modern lighting fixtures. The kitchen gleamed with state-of-the-art equipment while still maintaining the well-seasoned woks that had been in the family for generations. Every detail had been carefully considered. The chairs were designed for comfort but featured subtle Chinese motifs. The plates, custom-made for the restaurant, bore a dragon pattern that only became visible when filled with food. Even the staff uniforms struck a balance between traditional dignity and modern practicality. One afternoon, just days before the opening, James found David in the kitchen practicing with one of their grandfather's old cleavers. The rhythmic chopping sound took him back to his own childhood, watching his father prepare dinner service. "I remember watching you do this when I was little," David said, not looking up from his precise cuts. "I used to think it was magic, how you could move so fast and never miss." "Your grandfather taught me that technique," James replied, picking up another cleaver. "He always said the knife becomes an extension of your arm, but only if you respect it." Together, father and son worked in companionable silence, their cleavers moving in harmony as they prepared ingredients for the next day's training session. It was a moment of perfect synthesis. Old wisdom meeting new purpose. Opening night arrived with an energy that hummed through the building like electricity. The Golden Dragon Heritage Center sparkled with life, each floor representing a different facet of their vision. Guests began arriving early, many of them former regulars from the original restaurant, their faces lighting up with recognition when they saw James. Mrs. Liu, their very first customer from 30 years ago, embraced James with tears in her eyes. "I thought we'd lost this place forever," she said, gesturing to the space around her. "But this is even more beautiful than before." The dining room filled quickly with an eclectic mix of guests, old friends, food critics, corporate executives, and curious locals. Marcus Wellington sat at a central table, beaming with pride as he watched the evening unfold. Even Sarah Webb was there, now graduated from James's training program and helping to coordinate service with a grace she'd never shown at the Grand Plaza. In the kitchen, David orchestrated his team with the precision of a conductor. His menu paid homage to their family's classic dishes while introducing subtle, modern twists. The Peking duck, their signature dish, emerged from the kitchen with skin crackling to perfection, accompanied by handmade pancakes and a house-made hoisin sauce that had taken weeks to perfect. "Order for table 7, David called out, his voice carrying the same authority James remembered from his own father. "Emperor's feast with the wine pairing." James moved through the dining room with his characteristic grace, now teaching even as he served. A young trainee named Maria shadowed him, watching intently as he demonstrated the art of anticipating guests' needs before they arose. "Notice how Mr. Chen shifts the water glass slightly before the guest reaches for it," Sarah explained to another trainee. "It's these small gestures that make service seamless." The evening's centerpiece came when David emerged from the kitchen, pushing a cart laden with their grandfather's famous dim sum. He had spent months recreating these recipes, combining traditional techniques with his own innovations. As he served each table, he shared stories of learning to make these dishes at his father's side. Ming, seated at a corner table with some of their oldest friends, watched the scene with quiet joy. Her artwork adorned the walls, delicate watercolors capturing scenes from their family's history, including one of James's father standing proudly in front of the original Golden Dragon. Tommy, the young waiter who had once mocked James at the Grand Plaza, approached their table hesitantly. He had been one of the first to apply for the training program, his former arrogance replaced by genuine desire to learn. "Mrs. Chen," he said, bowing slightly, "Mr. Chen has taught me so much about what real service means. I'm honored to be learning from your family's tradition." As the night progressed, James found himself standing near the entrance, observing the harmonious flow of service and celebration. Marcus joined him, holding 2 glasses of the 2005 Bordeaux that had become something of a symbol for their journey. "You've created something extraordinary here, James," Marcus said, handing him a glass. "This isn't just a restaurant or a training center. It's a bridge between generations." James nodded, watching as David demonstrated a traditional tea-pouring technique to a group of fascinated culinary students. "It's everything I dreamed of and more," he replied. "We're not just preserving the past, we're building the future." A subtle chime sounded through the restaurant, an innovation of David's that replaced the old practice of shouting orders. It was gentler, more elegant, but served the same purpose: old wisdom in a new voice. 1 year later, James stood in the center's training room, watching a new class of students practice their skills. The Golden Dragon Heritage Center had exceeded all expectations, becoming a beacon for those who believed in the perfect balance of tradition and innovation. Maria, their star graduate, was now teaching her own class, demonstrating the same attention to detail that James had instilled in her. "Service isn't just about carrying plates," she told her students, unknowingly echoing James's father's words. "It's about carrying traditions, dignity, and the art of making people feel truly cared for." The restaurant had earned critical acclaim, with David's fusion of traditional recipes and modern techniques drawing praise from food critics across the country. But, more importantly, it had become a place where families gathered, where memories were made, where traditions were both honored and renewed. Sarah Webb had transformed completely from her Grand Plaza days. She now headed the center's professional development program, teaching corporate clients about the value of human connection in an increasingly digital world. "Mr. Chen showed me that efficiency without empathy is meaningless," she often said in her seminars. The training center had grown beyond their initial vision. Hotels and restaurants from around the world sent their staff to learn the Golden Dragon approach to hospitality. Even Marcus was amazed by the impact. "We're not just training servers," he remarked during a board meeting. "We're preserving an art form." Late one evening, after the last students had left and the kitchen had been cleaned, James found David in their small family museum, a room dedicated to their history. Photos of the original Golden Dragon hung alongside artifacts from their grandfather's era. The first menu, handwritten recipes, the cleaver that had prepared thousands of meals. "You know, Dad," David said, studying a picture of his grandfather, "I used to think success meant breaking away from all this. Now I understand it means building upon it." James smiled, remembering his own journey of understanding. "Your grandfather used to say that a tree needs deep roots to grow tall. I've been thinking," David continued, turning to face his father. "We should expand the program, but not in the way Marcus suggested. Instead of franchising, we could create a scholarship fund, help other families preserve their culinary heritage." James felt pride swell in his chest. His son had not only embraced their past but was finding ways to share its wisdom with others. The next morning, as James prepared for another day of teaching, he paused by the window overlooking the city. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the streets where his father had first arrived decades ago, dreaming of creating something lasting. Ming joined him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. "About journeys," he replied. "About how sometimes the longest path leads you right back home." Below, the day's first students were arriving, their eager faces reminding James of himself at their age. Each one carried their own dreams, their own traditions, their own stories waiting to be told. And in the kitchen he could hear David beginning his morning routine, the familiar sound of knife against cutting board echoing through the building. The rhythm was the same one James's father had taught him, the same one he had taught David, and the same one that would continue to teach future generations about the perfect balance between honoring the past and embracing the future. The Golden Dragon Heritage Center had become more than just a successful business. It was a living testament to the power of perseverance, the importance of family, and the timeless truth that true hospitality comes from the heart. As James turned to begin another day of sharing his legacy, he smiled, knowing that his father's dream hadn't just survived, it had soared,